Good evening and welcome to Santa Cruz Live in Silicon Valley, Water at Scale. My name is Kyle Mulrow. I am Cowell 2016 and I graduated in marine biology and got one of my many interests in water and water technologies, as our panel will talk about tonight. I joined the Alumni Association, or the group of alumni who put together these events at Alumni Weekend last year, which is coming up at the end of the month, and I encourage you all to go. It's a wonderful time. So a few things that have been wonderful for Santa Cruz recently. So UC Santa Cruz celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2015. In a short 50 years, the university has achieved many milestones, including that UCSC is ranked first in research influence around the world by number of citations.
All right.
It is ranked 11th among the top 100 universities that are just 50 years old. And with 16,000 students and over 100,000 alumni, we are making an impact on the world. We are closing in on becoming the largest engineering school in Northern California. The university has a lot to celebrate this year, but I'll note just a few. This fall, we had the grand opening of this center, UC Santa Cruz Silicon Valley campus, showcasing that UC Santa Cruz is the UC of Silicon Valley. We also celebrated the naming of Rachel Carson College, named after the American conservationist Rachel Carson and author of Silent Spring. We celebrated in a few weeks, we are celebrating Alumni Weekend, April 28th to 30th. Registration is now open. A bit about tonight's event. UC Santa Cruz Live is an ongoing series of talks and panels discussions bringing UCSC researchers and their collaborators to Silicon Valley. Sponsored by the UC Santa Cruz alumni, our mission is to bring friends together to raise the visibility of the incredible research and the impact of work at UC Santa Cruz. Following the panel discussion, we will have Q&A session, followed by a business card raffle at the end of the night. And if you're tweeting, our hashtag is #UCSCLive. So tonight we will hear from a distinguished panel speaking on technologies, infrastructure, and entrepreneurship involved in California's water. Looking from small to great, we will look at swimming pools, homes, cities, and our state, hence water at scale. Opportunities will be discussed in water chemistry testing, flow and leakage monitoring, purchasing and supply of districts, conservation, and investment and policy of the state. My pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening. Ravi Kurani, CEO and founder of Sutro Smart Watering Monitoring Systems. Hilary Bryant, co-founder and chief marketing officer of Calliope Waterworks.
Don't worry, we're changing the name.
Dr. Hossein Ashktorab, the unit manager of Santa Clara Valley Water District. Dr. Brent Haddad, Professor and Chair, Technology Management Department, Professor of Environmental Studies. And our moderator, Peter Drekmeier, Policy Director with the Tuolumne River Trust. Thank you all, and if you can take a moment to share with you about your work.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and Sarah and everyone else for organizing this event. It's great to see all these folks in the audience. So my name is Peter Drekmeier, and I went to UC Berkeley, but I actually studied abroad one semester in Santa Cruz. And it was fantastic. I had 2 quarters there, such a beautiful campus, and I actually wanted to stay, but it would have been harder to graduate, and I was kind of ready to move on. But so I'm a semi-slug, and it's good to be home with the family here. So be sure to, we have a really impressive panel here, so be sure to read their full bios in the program. But we want to jump right in. We want to make sure there's plenty of time for the audience to ask questions. So we're going to have an opportunity for each of our panelists to speak, and then we really want to open it up for a discussion. So think about your questions, and this is an opportunity to learn about water at all scales. So we're going to start with Ravi Kurani, and talking a little bit about the local and how we can use certain technology in our daily lives and at a local scale to improve water quality and possibly have additional water resources available in a state that very much needs them. So Ravi, welcome. Tell us a little bit about what you do and your product and how you're going to change the world.
Yeah. I think kind of an interesting story is how we actually got to where we are. So I used to actually be an associate at a venture fund in India. We had a $20 million fund. We were the first of its kind back in 2014, I think it was. And the main goal of the fund was to only invest in companies or technologies that were catering to people who earned less than $2 a day. So these are people in rural populations, people in villages. And I saw a lot of companies come through. Just you can think about Shark Tank, but like India, right? Except for I'm not really Mark Cuban. That's kind of, I'm not going to call myself that. And so we saw a lot of these companies coming through. And one of the issues that we had was that there was a lot of companies coming in that were actually working on water, and most importantly, water filtration, right? Because these communities in India need clean water, and frankly, the issue was that the water that was coming out of these wells or these sources were just very dirty. This one particular business model that we saw was a company that was inventing a filtration device that cost $1,000. Now you can imagine somebody that earns less than $2 a day is not able to afford a $1,000 filter. So we went down to actually Bangalore, I think is what it was, and we tested the water, and it turns out there was a really simple 5-cent chlorine pill that could be used for that particular water to basically clean it. And I want to make one thing clear. I'm not for kind of band-aids. I'm not for putting short-term solutions on water. However, if your goal is to get people out of hospital beds, let's do the short-term solution first, and we'll figure out exactly how to actually do a more sustainable solution. Which got me thinking of, well, these guys are developing this really expensive water filter. Why don't we figure out what the water quality is, and why didn't they know what the water quality was? And when I asked them this question, they said, hey, well, we're developing the Jack or Jane of all trades water filter. I don't really care what the water quality is. And I kicked back with, well, don't you need to know what it is to actually solve that issue? So it got me thinking of, well, how do we create the Google Maps of basically water quality? Because if you look at where water is used, whether it be for agriculture, for the fish that we eat in our sushi, for the drinking water in Flint, Michigan, or in India, all the way down to a swimming pool, how do we know what that water quality is so we can figure out what we'd like to use it for, and we can treat it in the right way, which is how we developed the product that we actually built. We tried selling it to the Indian government, which is probably the stupidest thing a startup can ever do. Startups should never sell to governments, by the way, first off. And so we turned around and we developed this really cool technology, and we said, well, hey, here in our backyard, there's a ton of pools here. We're obviously in a drought. And how do we use this technology, validate the hardware, deploy them into swimming pools to understand how to actually properly measure water chemistry and tell people what to do? So we can actually create a larger impact and a larger architecture to solve issues like Flint, Michigan, and like India. So that's what I'm building, and that's how we got started.
So you just mentioned Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
How might your technology improve the situation there?
Yeah. So if you kind of dig into what exactly happened there, it was the changing of the water source, right? And not the entire city is laden with lead-filled water. It was because the chloramine content in the new reservoir that actually ended up what it was being switched to ended up activating lead in pipes in a certain part of the city, which had obviously old lead pipes. What you could do there, right? And the big issue that reservoirs have, we just, as a side note, walked off actually from Imagine H2O. And I spoke to multiple municipalities. I'm not speaking for all of them. However, a big issue that municipalities have is they have an issue in last mile monitoring. So they can measure really, they know what's happening actually at the reservoir. They know what's happening at some probably nodal point. However, from that nodal point all the way down to the house, they don't know what the water quality is. And so with a sensor that's robust enough to be tossed into a pool, why can't you put it in a pipe? Why can't you put it into your sink? And so if you could develop sensors or in a Brita filter, sure. If you can get to that sort of granularity, and if you can develop sensors for lead and for arsenic and for phosphates, nitrates, pH, which is what we're doing, you can now begin to get more data that's all the way downstream to actually begin to predict and assume these sorts of issues before they happen.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned Imagine H2O, which was one of my favorite groups. And you were recognized by them, which is a great honor. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about Imagine H2O and what award you received?
Yeah, Tom Ferguson, by the way, has an amazing British accent. And so, if you've ever had a chance to go to an Imagine H2O event and just listen to him talk on stage, it's absolutely amazing. You should check it out. we were finalists out of Imagine H2O. Imagine H2O is a water accelerator in San Francisco. We are based up in the city. We're actually down in the Mission District, which has absolutely amazing burritos, by the way, too. And so, what Imagine H2O really helped us do was kind of twofold. The first was help us really come back outside of the pool industry and understand what are problems outside of swimming pools in your backyard residential swimming pool. And the second thing that it did was it actually opened up those doors to those particular organizations and those people. And so we were able to meet utilities. We were able to meet farmers. I was with the founder of Imagine H2O, Scott Bryant. We drove to Fresno, and I gave a pitch to 300 farmers. Right, it was the first time that I pitched to 300 farmers, and spoke to them about the issues with the drought, and spoke to issues about the water quality that they're getting from the groundwater. So those are kind of the two major things that Imagine H2O did personally for us.
How was your reception from the farmers?
It was frightening at first to pitch to a room of farmers. Very different than this. They loved it. I think they've been through a lot in the last 5 years, right? California's been in drought. I think they got slapped on the wrist twice, and they feel like, in a drought, the government comes in, the state of California, and taking from their words, they said, look, we're already in a drought. We don't have enough water to actually grow the crops that we grow for the U.S. We feed the majority of the country, especially here in Fresno and the farmers that I was speaking to. And most importantly, they were put with this, what's it called, SGMA, which was the Surface Groundwater Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was that you need to manage your nitrates that you're actually putting in because people were over-fertilizing. Now, if you go to a farmer and you're telling them, hey, look, I'm going to limit your water that you're using, and on top of that, the water that you're actually using, I'm going to then start regulating that, they're not going to feel that great, especially for something that uses, a third of the input is actual water. And so where Sutro comes in is if you look at the inputs to actually how to grow a plant, right? You're looking at the soil quality, you're looking at the water quality, you're looking at some offset, which is the fertilizer, and obviously there's the sun. It's a pretty simple equation. Soil quality, there's an immense amount of smart soil sensors that are out there. However, nobody's measuring water quality because they haven't created a robust enough sensor to actually do that. And so if you can add in the water quality plus the soil quality, you can then, on a real-time basis, know how much fertilizer you actually need to make sure you're optimizing the plant that you're growing, which is why they're really interested, because with all this regulation, they're being forced to both look at surface water and groundwater and create some mix that then is going to actually, they're going to put into those plants.
And can you explain how your product actually works? If someone wants to utilize it, what process do they go through?
Sure. To use it for like the swimming pool?
For the swimming pool, right?
I feel like I'm taking the spotlight here. Does anybody else? Sure. So this
is a great product.
This is it right here for the swimming pool. The whole way that we've made it, and I think one of the beauties of why we actually did get stuck into the residential home industry is people want something that's simple. We're all busy, and managing a pool is not the first thing you're thinking about when you go home, right? You have a job, you're cooking dinner, you have kids to take care of, you have your husband or your wife. And so we had to create something that could be set up in less than 5 minutes. And the goal here is you should be able to order this off of Amazon. You get it in your mail, right? You open up the box, take this thing out, you put the batteries in, you toss it into your swimming pool. Initially, you'd have your phone, which you can actually take, and you'd then pair this with your actual Wi-Fi. Once this is hooked up to your Wi-Fi, you're actually up and running. What the thing does is it communicates with your Wi-Fi at your home, up through our cloud, obviously, which has machine learning algorithms to predict what your pool's chemistry is or could be. And on your phone, we tell you exactly what chemicals to put in there, right? Put in 2 pounds of chlorine, put in 3 pounds of acid, and if you don't have those chemicals, the way that we make money is we take your credit card and we connect it up to Amazon Prime, and when you run low out of chemicals, we just ship you the chemicals before you actually run out. That's our model for the swimming pool industry.
Great. Final question.
Sure.
Fracking, good or bad?
You want the spotlight away now?
Yeah. Anybody else want to answer this?
Maybe that's not a local issue, but.
Yeah, you know what? I focus on swimming pools right now, so I can't quite answer that question.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't have enough knowledge in that space.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sounds like a
Thank
fantastic product. Next up, we have Hilary Bryant, Porter 94,
Yeah.
co-founder and chief marketing officer of Calliope Waterworks.
Calliope, right? I actually like that name.
Yeah, but we're actually going to change it because we struggle with this every day. As much as I like the name, it is it's tough
Calliope,
to say.
yeah.
Calliope.
I always think of a butterfly because there's a clippy silver spot.
Yes,
So, Calliope. and former city council member in Santa Cruz and a former mayor.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be, everybody on this panel. I have admired your work from afar, and I think it's tremendous. And I wish that you were down in Santa Cruz, because I actually think that there's some great synergy between the work that we're doing and what you're doing. And kudos to Kyle, because I'm an alum. We get asked to do things, and oftentimes, I can't, I'm busy. And this guy says, yeah, sure, I'll put together a panel, I'll take care of it, I'll figure out what it is. And between the work that he and Sarah did, it's very impressive, and thank you for inviting me and including me. I am really not the water expert. I just spent a whole lot of time when I was on city council thinking about water. In fact, I have my water conservation manager from the city of Santa Cruz here, Toby Goddard, who was my resource. And part of the reason I got into the project that I'm doing now is because when I was mayor of the city, we were in the, you can't think of it now, it's pouring rain all the time, in the middle of a drought that was beyond imagination. And from the perspective of a city where we're primarily based in surface water, if you're not getting rain, you have no water. And we were very seriously considering a large desalination project. We just didn't know how we were going to manage this. There was not enough supply for the people that we had. And even in a community like Santa Cruz, where I can't tell you how impressed I was time and time again when you asked people to conserve, they would conserve above and beyond what you could even imagine they could do, and they would still meet and exceed the goals. If it didn't start raining, it didn't matter. We were in such a crisis. And at the time when we pulled back on the desal project and sort of started reassessing and went back to our community and said, what are we going to do and how are we going to solve this together? We put together a board of very committed citizens from a variety of different walks of life and different backgrounds, some very focused on water, and some just, I'm concerned about this problem, I want to contribute. And we started raising rates and sending people to the most god-awful thing to do with your Saturday is go to water school. Even if you like water, going to water school is not fun. We did not make it particularly exciting. And part of what happened at water school was you learned how to read your water meter. Who here knows how to read? Do you know how to read your water meter? Raise your hand. This is a water crowd, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of hands. So I'm the mayor. How do I read the water meter? You have to go out to the street. You have to lift this concrete block. You have to look at these numbers, and they're spinning, and what do these numbers mean? There's a whole lot of numbers, and it really doesn't translate into whatever is happening in my house. And then if I have a leak, I'm told I need to shut the water off and make sure the dial's not spinning. It's not an easy process. And there was a great deal of talk at water school about how to do this. And it seemed to me there must be a better, easier way to do this and give people that information. And while I was on city council, I didn't find that solution. And after I got off, I was trying to figure out what to do next. And yeah, working in government's hard. Working in government was particularly hard for my family, and I was trying to think of something new and different. And somebody who was a dear friend of mine, our kids went to preschool together, our CEO at Calliope, Carrie Waters, called me up. She's one of those people, I went to MIT when I was 16, and then she went and got her MBA at Berkeley, and on and on and on. And so when Carrie calls you, you know she's probably got a pretty good idea. I'm one of those people who are like, oh, that would be good if somebody else went and did it. She actually goes and does it. And said, you know, I'm working on this project, and I now know all the water that's going through my house, what device is using that water. And I just read that Jerry Brown, our governor, told me that if I could, you know, I needed to cut back by 20, at the time it was 20 or 25%. And I realized that if I'm losing 18% of my water to leaks, if I can just find out the nexus there, I can still take long showers and pretty much not change my lifestyle if I can figure this out. I said, yeah, sure. If you can really do this, I'd like to see it. So fast forward, go check out what she's doing. And lo and behold, she and a team of really smart engineers and data scientists had figured it out. And see, this is a problem. You give a politician an open mic, and I'm just going to go on and on and on. But long story short, what we have developed, what they have developed, and I have just been a great champion of because I believe that there's real value in the information, is very similar to what Ravi was talking about. It's a single device, call it the Bowie. So that's a much easier name than Calliope. It's a buoy, and it attaches to your home right near your water shutoff valve, and through the water flow, we send the information. We've got a board on there. It sends the information up to the cloud. Same thing through the customer's Wi-Fi. We disaggregate it through machine learning algorithms, and we can give you real-time information about that's your washing machine, that's your sink, that's your bathtub, that's your pool, that's your irrigation. We can break it down to all the component parts, and we can detect a leak up to 1/64 of a gallon, and we can send you that notification, and then if we tell you have a leak, you can shut it off from your smartphone, your tablet, your computer at work. You can shut it off hundreds of miles away from the house that's actually leaking. So not only can you understand and recognize what water is being used, but in a problem or when we notice something unusual happening, you can shut that water off. And this has become something that I really believe has an opportunity to make some big changes. There are smart meters, there are AMI meters going in on people's homes, but not with this real-time information and not with the ability to actually do something about that information. It will tell you what your water's doing, but for somebody to be able to then act on it and shut the water off, that's a different story. And it's been really exciting. It's so different being in a startup from being in government. I go into the office on Monday, and by Friday, we're doing something completely different. It moves very quickly, but it's really an exciting time. And I firmly believe that, yes, it is raining now, but this is something that we really need to start thinking about very strategically. Water is a precious resource that we think about as being renewable, but we just need to do a better job, and we can do a better job managing it. I even find in my own home with my 13-year-old son that loves to take really long showers after he surfs. And he's in there, and at some point I can say, you've been in the shower for 9 minutes and you used 25 gallons of water, it's time to get out. And he understands that 25 gallons of water is a lot of water, and we can do better. So we can all make those incremental improvements, and I'm excited to be on a project that's doing something about it.
Listen, the buoy sounds fantastic, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. I'm imagining that it's something you wrap around a pipe, and somehow
I brought it, just like
well,
Ravi.
yeah, let's
yes.
see what it...
Oops, I've lost my microphone. Hang on one second.
And it looks like a buoy.
It looks like a buoy. Buoy, I grew up sailing, and my mom, who is here, was a Commodore of a yacht club, and so she appreciated the buoy reference, but it's safety, it gives you information. So the buoy goes, it is just a single device. There's no other sensors that you put around your home, and really it's typically at the shutoff valve on your home, and the water flows through. We have in here just a few parts that are giving measuring the water flow just like a utility meter would for the city. And then the information goes up to the cloud, disaggregates it. We had a UCSC wicked smart data scientist working on this project. He was astrophysicist that was studying the stars, and then figured he could probably take on water, and he did a pretty darn good job of it. UCSC produces some pretty smart people, and he has done a tremendous job with it. Now we have a team of data scientists working on it, and it's giving us, we've found there's certain things that are pretty easy to figure out. Your toilet is a really easy pattern. A running toilet's a pretty easy pattern, but darn, your washing machine is pretty tricky. Every washing machine is different amounts of use, different cycles, different temperatures, but we're getting better and better, and the more houses we're on, the better we're doing.
And this will tell you what appliance is using water and if it's leaking or inefficient.
I can look on my phone right now and see who's using what in my house and how much they're using. And even little things like, oh, somebody used the sink after the toilet, that's good to know. I want to know those things. And now or if they did, which is, I have a 13-year-old son, as I mentioned, that's sometimes problematic. But you know all those things. In fact, I'll tell you a story, and my mom's here, but I'll tell you the story anyway. I was at a conference and was trying to call the house, and nobody was answering the phone. And finally, I left a message and said, I can see the water running. I know you are home. Will you please pick up the telephone? And they sure enough picked up and were like, yeah, well, we're blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it has that effect, too. But it's pretty amazing how quickly this device learns everything that's going on in your house. Pipe goes in one end, comes out the other. We have a thing called this gets pretty technical, but it's called a water horn, and it basically it's a copper piece of piping. So you cut about a 4-inch run of your pipe, and you have to cut the pipe because in order to shut your water off, you have to get into the piping. But again, it's typically right by the front of people's homes, and we're on over 50 houses now in 5 different states, and growing incrementally this summer.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, I served on the Palo Alto City Council during the recession, which was challenging, but I can't imagine how challenging it was in Santa Cruz during the drought, because we were all watching Santa Cruz. That was the place where we were going to see either made or broken. And so I followed it a little bit, but I'm not sure where things stand now. It's always challenging when people are conserving, and their rates are going up, and they feel like they're being penalized for conserving. What do you see as the future of water supply in Santa Cruz and that region?
So again, people like Toby Goddard did the hard work. We were managing drought, recession, public safety crisis. There's a reason I got out of government. It was very rewarding, but very difficult time in our community. And it is a hard conversation. I mean, people were coming to council meetings, they were mad, and I understand why you're mad, because you are conserving. You're like, I'm saving, I'm cutting back, I don't have a lawn anymore, I don't have this, I don't have that, and you're charging me more. And I'm mad. Why are you charging me more? And because you have to think of the infrastructure to, and these are the experts in infrastructure, but I understand it from a cost perspective. You're using less water. We're in the business of selling water, which people don't really think about, even though we want to conserve. That at some point, the water districts, water utilities, they're selling water, and the infrastructure cost is tremendous. And our infrastructure, for the most part, in this country was put in the 1960s with a lifespan that we're hitting it. We have trillions and trillions of dollars of infrastructure problems. So people think the drought's gone and it's going to be fine. It's not. I mean, this is an ongoing problem, not just in the state of California. New York just, $80 billion they're estimating in terms of infrastructure repairs. It is a problem across this country that we're all going to have to manage in some way, shape, or form. And at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for that. So your bills are going to go up. There's studies being done now that water is actually going to become unaffordable for a large percentage of the population. And that, to me, that's just, we don't think about that. The interesting thing from a startup perspective is you talk to investors like nobody cares about their water bill. Think you should, and you will, and people across this country will start caring, and then we've got a real problem, and people need to start talking about it and thinking about it.
Well, thank you for your past service and for continuing to work on such an important issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we originally were expecting Gary Kremen, who's on the board of the Valley Water District, to participate. And I know a lot of you came here to ask him about the founding of Match.com, which is part of his resume. And Gary will point out that he's working on a new program that will match people who want to shower together to conserve water. But Gary couldn't make it here tonight, so we have a great pinch hitter, Hossein Ashktorab, who I've known for a number of years, and I've been so impressed with his good work. And he's with the Santa Clara Valley Water District, which has a fantastic history from the 1920s, and when groundwater was being overpumped, the people elected to create a water district, and things have turned around. There are still a lot of challenges. Sometimes there's not enough water, sometimes there's too much water. And Hossein, if you could tell us a little bit about what the water district does, some of the interesting projects you've worked on, and what you see as the future of water in Santa Clara Valley.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. And also thank you for UC Santa Cruz, especially Kyle and Sarah, that putting this good program together. Actually, I'm not Gary, and I don't anything to do with Match.com at all, but I am in matching of water and saving water. So as Peter mentioned, I know him since the beginning because he's one of the great guys that have been in conservation. I started with Santa Clara Valley Water District in conservation. At the time that conservation was nothing, nobody talked about conservation. Like if you talk about late 90s, it was just maybe just few outreach program that, when you showering, watch the shower head not falling off on your head, and also the toilet was 16 gallons or 20 gallons per flush. Now we're talking about 1 or even less than 1. And then at the time, it was just only 1 person in conservation working. So after about 5 years in the conservation program, I developed like 20 programs with help of others. Of course, that was 87 to 92 was a lot of drought going on, and everybody's thinking about what we can do in order to save water. The cheapest was conservation, of course. So it has been coming up a lot. I cannot believe, when I go back to that years, I had to like fight for just only changing the toilet from 16 gallons to 6 gallons to 5.7. It was really hard to do that. Now we're coming with the gadget that they can read your meters and tell how many people are showering, and also the swimming pool and stuff. This is really amazing. After it was not that many years, if you're talking about it, that the people coming to realize that how they can save water, and they should save the water is a way of life now. And I was talking to Tom about this. I said, do you remember at that time when the drought was over, the water shoot back in there again? But we don't see that now because the people believe in it. The people done it. They think that this needs to be saved for a generation, and that's the cheapest we can do. So Santa Clara Valley Water District is the wholesaler. I don't know how many people know about Santa Clara Valley Water District. Okay, you are not making mistake with City of Santa Clara, of course, right? Hopefully not. So we are the wholesaler that we sell water from Palo Alto to Gilroy. It's about 14 retailers we sell water to. And some people, they believe, when I talk to some of my friends and neighbors, and they said, what are you doing? I said, managing water at the district, and manage. So I thought that the water coming from rain and go to somewhere, and then the pipe coming to the house, isn't it? I said, okay, that's the simplest thing you can think of, but we have reservoir, we have pipeline, we have treatment plants, we have this, we have that. Really? Yeah, okay. So some people, they believe that the water is coming from the sky and then goes to the pipeline, and then they just sit there. They don't believe how much work we do to get that water. Like here in Santa Clara, we are lucky to have good basin, underground water, our biggest storage, which the water, we put it in there ourselves. It's a rain coming, it goes naturally there, some of it, but most of it we put it there ourselves. So we recharge it every time you see go pipes by Highway 17. You see on left-hand side, you see a lot of ponds that it is there. By Almaden, by different areas, we have so many ponds that we recharge groundwater with. So we are responsible for water supply, and not only we do that, we are also responsible for flood protection, and we're responsible for environmental. So we are environmental stewardship too. So we think that conservation is number one. We need to save as much as we can. That's why we spend so many millions of dollars every year to make sure that the people conserve their water. Change their toilets, change their faucets, aerators, put the low water use plants in your landscaping, replacing your turf. And then also we are working on the recycled water. So once I done with the conservation, not done, I had conservation and recycling, but at that time recycling was not that much. So conservation got to the bigger projects, and then they said, now we need to increase recycled water. Hossein, you have too much in your hands, so you better just take care of recycling. So now I have recycling water, and I was telling Peter that when I was really pushing for that Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center, which is the largest purification facility in Northern California. I don't know how many of you visit the Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center. One, total. Two, okay. So I think I really encourage you to do that. I know you got, looks like around May 20th, you have set up the tour to go in there. If you cannot do it, call us. We set up another tour for you. This is the really amazing treatment plan that I don't think that you have seen it before. Because what it does is I wanted to tell you, on the other side of a street in Zanker Road from San Jose, Santa Clara wastewater treatment plant, we received the wastewater that has already been gone through secondary treated, twice treated. Once you receive the water, you see that's clear, but has a lot of stuff in there still that you cannot see. So that water is good for landscaping, for cooling towers, and that's what we call it recycled water. That's a purple pipe. You said you should not drink it, but you use it for grass. I know the grass loves it because it has a lot of nitrogen in there. Your landscape is going to be good for it. But you cannot drink it. So what we get that water to our treatment plant, and we do MF, microfiltration. The people that they know about high-tech, it's a very small membrane. And then we get through RO, reverse osmosis, that it's very tiny holes that everything is going to be left behind except the molecules of H and O, which is water. Just water can pass through it. Of course, there are some other molecules that small, it may go through, but we're going to destroy it by UV. UV is ultraviolet that they use it for disinfection. All the doctor offices and those they're using. Above and beyond that, we're going to use advanced oxidation, also another technique to make sure nothing is going to be there. So the water that's coming out from that treatment plant, you can actually drink it right there. I have drunk it, the water after RO, before UV even. Nothing happened on me so far. I'm good. I hope so. So the thing is, you drink that water, and the people coming in, amazing. I seen the people say, "I don't believe it. This is wastewater. I cannot drink." Yeah, you know, and yucky factor. Then they come in, they see the treatment that's what we have there, and they said, "Why you want to put it in the ground? Why you then not just connect it to the pipeline so we can drink it right there, because it is so clean or so good that we should drink it right there." So we are actually, what we are doing, we built the treatment plant, which is 8 MGD. Some agencies, the 8 MGD is provide the whole water for them, the whole city. But because we are a huge agency, 8 MGD is a pilot for us. So we put this pilot in there, we built it, and we started working on it in 2014. And hopefully in 6-7 years, we're going to do that water, with that type of treatment plant that I'm talking about. That's going to go to either groundwater, put it on the pond that I mentioned to you, so it goes through the groundwater, so the retailers are going to pull it from the ground, or we're going to put it through the conventional treatment plant that we have. 3 major treatment plants in the county that most of your water going through that treatment plant before you drinking it. So we go through that treatment, another treatment additional to what the treatment I mentioned to you, and then come to the people's house. So that's the plan that we have, and that's a future water. And that's a water that we believe that is going to be drought-proof, because we already have it here. We recycle it like other things that the nature does recycling, and we do it faster and better. And then also it's something that actually the people see that this is our water. We need to keep it here. Why it has to go somewhere else or go to the bay? So that's why that we really put a lot of energy and also technology in behind that to make sure that this water is going to be available for the future of this county. So I'm going to stop right here, because I know that if going forward, I'm going to get excited and more excited about this, because that's my baby, you know, that's the treatment plan that we built. And then I just want to tell you a story that I told Peter, that when we start building this treatment plan, it was $52 million project. And then economy was really bad. It's going down, and then everybody says, oh, why are we building this? We need money for other things. And so we push. Our board members were really interested for future. They were visionary, and I push also from staff. And then so once we finish it, and then it was drought coming on, and everybody says, why you didn't build bigger size? I said, come on, you know, do you remember when they said that? So this is their story. So we were really putting forward in the technology that we think is going to be doing good for the county here.
Hossein, I'm so glad you brought up advanced purified water, because this really is a fantastic program. Thank you for being the champion of it.
Sure.
And you look really good right now. I mean, this was what everyone was talking about during the drought. You mentioned 8 MGD, million gallons per day, which is almost as much water as my city, Palo Alto, uses. So for San Jose, it might not be a lot. But I really talk up your program in Palo Alto because we have a wastewater treatment plant, a regional plant, that releases 20 million gallons per day into the bay. And that is a tremendous resource, and it's drought-proof. So thank you for being a role model for the rest of us. Quick question. The water district gets about half of its water from the delta. How does the quality of advanced purified water compare to delta water, and how do the costs compare?
I don't want to be comparing, because my other side of the district, my friends are working on the imported water. So I believe the water that we purify is better quality than imported water. This is my belief, and the data shows that too. But I don't want to criticize anything or saying that's bad water. That water is good enough, but this is pure water. You know, you cannot find better water than that. So the quality-wise is better, and I believe it because I see the data, and daily we take in a lot of data to make sure that we have enough data to convince the public and also the regulatory agency for future using it.
And essentially, it's distilled water.
Yes.
I mean, we might need to add things to it before we drink it so it doesn't leach nutrients out of our body. That's how clean it is. Yes. Correct?
Yeah, you mentioned something that it would be good for the public to know. Is nothing in there. There's no, it's just H2O, and that's why it's so clean that if you put it in the pipe, it's going to eat the pipe. So that's why we have to add, we call it conditioning. We have to add some calcium, magnesium in there in order to make sure that we can move it around. So.
And then how about the cost comparison with imported water, delta water?
Depend on because we're receiving so many different type of water. We have state water, we have HHE water, we have federal water, we have our local water. So from our imported water, I think it's a little bit more expensive because of energy that's being used for the purification of the water, because the RO system uses a lot of energy. But the good news is, from 10 years ago up to now, Dr. Haddad knows about it, the technology has improved that almost the efficiency got 50% better than what it was before. So 50% lower energy for the same RO system that is purified the water. So in terms of the cost, if you look at it compared to HHE, our cost of purification is around between $700 to $1,100 per acre foot. HHE now, it's about, who was that? Who was talking about HHE? Is about
Director John Weed was saying
1,700. Yeah, 1,700 is going to get to 2,100. So actually, it's cheaper than HHE water. The good things is, as I said, I cannot emphasize more. This is the local water. It's a drought-proof, so you don't need to worry about, I might get that water from imported water, or somebody's going to cut the water from me or not. This is here, and it's drought-proof, and we can use it.
Thank you again for your great work.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, and last but not least, we have Professor Brent Haddad, Professor and Chair of Technology Management and Environmental Studies at UC Santa Cruz, and he's going to talk about even bigger picture, some of the things that are happening and can happen at the state level, maybe even beyond. So,
Thanks.
thank you.
And hi, everybody. And I just want to thank Kyle and Sarah. They came up with this idea, and it's really exciting. I was so thrilled when they approached me and said, do you want to participate? And I'm just really happy to be here. So what I want to try to do is link these startups that are like a couple of people, and it's just great. It's starting almost at the kitchen table. And so here's the startup world that's innovating like crazy. And then you have the state government way on the other side. And and so you have this something very large over here. Then you have some exciting innovation happening here. And so one of the possible reactions you could have is, well, the state better stay out of the innovation process because there's nothing they can do to help. And so I would say that that's not correct. There actually are some things, and even some good justifications for why the state should act. But there are also some areas where the state really should stay out. And so let's sort of think about both of those. So one area where I think the state can make a difference, and that is in the area that's sort of broadly known as human capital. In other words, providing Ravi and Hilary with really good employees. And that's what the University of California and CSU does. And I just wanted to make a point about university funding in this regard. So as you know, the university is under pressure, and we're actually in a few good years because of the legislature and the governor funded us pretty well. But in places like North Carolina, it's terrible. In other states, things are going down. And one of the things that might come up and does come up are things like, well, what department are we going to cut? Or where are we going to cut back? And this discussion a few years back included, well, why don't we cut back astronomy? That's expensive. And so what we just, and they're studying the stars, all right, big deal. So what was the data scientist trained in?
Astrophysics.
Right, astrophysics. And so, all right, we cut the astronomy department, and the data scientist, who I bet was studying the data from the Kepler satellite, because I know some of the astrophysicists, and you need to be a top-notch data scientist to figure out what Earth-like planets are circling stars. Mm-hmm. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that's the data scientist that you had. And so it's really an important role for the state to keep that flow of really qualified people. And it may not be the exact major of where the startup is. It could be somebody who's nearby or even far away. But it's still an excellent university provides the seeds for innovation. Now, something we've done, and I'm really proud of it, is we've been working on building the innovative skills of the students. And in about a week here, we'll be having our business design competition, and we host something called a hackathon. And one of the innovations in that thing called a hackathon is it's basically a 48-hour push to develop innovations using student teams. And we have targeted some of the innovations at environment and have provided incentives and expertise background. Another thing that in data startups is an approach to development called scrums, which again is kind of from the idea in rugby of everybody crunching together and pushing as hard as they can. And there are these ways to build student teams, surround them with the right information, and the student teams are not all of the same feather. They have a variety of skills, and then you put expertise around this team, and then they push for some period of time, like an entire weekend or three or 4 days, and then at the end of that period, they present what they have. And this is a really innovative way to generate some exciting innovation in a short period of time. So there are things that the university can do, and we're part of the state government, and there's more there. So that's the human capital piece. So now let's talk. I'm going to suggest 2 other things. Finance. So the state invests a lot of money in research on water, but there's something the federal government does, and this is in the area of defense. It's called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And DARPA has an approach to funding where they have some target themes, and one of them might be like drones, like let's figure out how to use drones in the military in better ways. And DARPA is actually funding startups, and they don't care if it's a university. They don't really care who the end funder is. They just want the cutting edge group that's doing something about drones or about building bridges quickly or whatever it is that the Defense Department thinks they need. DARPA is this special funding force that's agile, and it funds startups. And so I know that Silicon Valley angels and venture capitalists love it when a firm has DARPA funding, because it means that the firm has not given up their equity to an earlier venture capitalist, and they've been able to develop their product. And so I think the state could use a water version of DARPA, and in fact, even an environment version of DARPA, where what we're funding are ways to protect our water supply, to increase our water efficiency, and increase our water quality. And so that's the kind of funding that I think has been very successful in terms of big government finance and startups. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I wanted to mention was governance. So the state is really involved in governance, and I think this is one of those areas where I'm going to quickly say that the state should not tell Ravi or Hilary how to run their businesses. So that's where the state should stay out. But when I think about your innovations, I think to myself, why should the Bowie not also be sending information to the water department? Why do we need now 2 meters when we have the Bowie? And why wouldn't a wastewater treatment plant have the Sutro, or is that what?
The Sutro.
The Sutro, because especially a wastewater treatment facility, it goes through one set of treatments after another, and they're constantly checking water quality. And what they're doing now is a lot more expensive than what you've come up with. So, but what is happening there is that for very good reasons, our water agencies are super conservative about adoption of technology. Because they don't want to risk the public health. So it's really hard to break in with an innovation. However, medical instruments, they break in even when it's surgical. Somehow there's an active, innovative world for breaking into medicine. There's an active, innovative world, as we've seen, for breaking into defense technology and building fighter planes and all that goes into that. And so one of the unsolved challenges is we need to protect the quality of the water. At the same time, we need to allow innovations to build ways that are cheaper and better into what we're doing. So those are the 3 areas I wanted to mention: governance, financing, and human capital.
Thank you, Professor. That was a really great recap of some of the big issues. And we hear a lot about science being under attack these days, and there's going to be the March for Science. And I was thinking about what you were saying about space, and NASA does a lot of space exploration, but they also have programs here at home. They can monitor the snowpack using LiDAR, so we know how much water is going to come down. There are those incredible maps of the drought and groundwater depletion, and seeing, the state turning red during the height of the drought. So that was very important information. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the future of science? Is science going to go away? It reminds me of that saying, the environment, ignore it and it will go away. Can we survive without science?
So this is such a great question, because there is a possible intellectual criticism of science, which is, it's kind of like taking that old joke about about statistics, that you can prove anything with statistics, taking that to its absolute extreme end. And it's sort of a cynical view about whether we can solve problems by using our senses and using common sense to evaluate what we've seen and measured. And so I would say that that's always at risk. But we need things like a free press, and we need things like universities where bad ideas get ground to pieces and good ideas get polished and polished and polished. And as long as we keep those areas where discourse can happen free and open, then we can still use science to achieve goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for all your good work. Oh. And thanks to our panel. What a fantastic group here. And covered a lot of issues. And now we wanted to open it up for questions from the audience. And the way this is going to work is we have a couple of microphones. And please wait till you have a microphone before you speak, because this is being videotaped. And we'll move back and forth, and maybe you can introduce yourself and ask your question. It could be to the panel as a whole or to an individual person.
My name's Alice Masick, and I'm a graduate of Crown College in 1971, the first four-year graduating class. Wow. However, it was not in science, it was in history that I graduated, history of science and economic history. When I heard that our Hayward or Castro Valley water was going over to chloramine instead of chlorine, and we had to now, if we had fish in a tank, not just set the water out to let it, if the chlorine evaporate, but we had to put specific chemicals into the water to make it so it didn't kill our fish with messing up their kidneys or something. I thought to myself, what does chloramine do to human beings? Now, you said in Flint, Michigan, the chloramine took the lead out of the pipes and put it into the people's water. You didn't know that was, I'm sure they didn't know that was going to happen. How much research, my question is, how much research is actually being done about the effects of chloramine on people?
Good question. Anyone have any insights into chloramine?
I bet you have the most insight.
I'm not in the water quality for drinking water. I'm in more recycled water. So the research, I'm just talking about my own area of work. I'm telling you, since 2014, we have been doing thousands of research to not only ourselves, but also we get it with other agencies to make sure that anything that we call it unknown, because you have sometimes known unknown, you know there is something in there, but you don't know. Unknown is something you don't know if there's nothing in there. We're doing unknown to find out if there is anything coming up in the future that we didn't really know about it, and how it's going to impact human health and environment, because we're both thinking about both sides. So from my view, because I'm coming from also research side from UC Davis, and my view, I'm really believing in science and research. And more than anything, I believe that if we do more, then we have less headache in the future, because once we know that definitely there's nothing in the water, there's no impact on anybody, no human, no environment, then we can really truly go to the public and say this is safe water and you can drink it. So from district view, I see there is nothing so far knocking the door happen on our water, drinking water. Nobody got sick. Nobody was, had any issues. You hear a lot of things from around, within the state, outside the state, that they have water quality issues. But we are always, I think this is because our board has one step ahead of, that the technology. As I told you, this treatment plant that we built, now it's $72 million. When we started with $52 million. This was at the time, everybody says, are you crazy? Why are you building that? This is in the future. You may not need it and those things, but we build it. Like three big, huge treatment plant that we have, we're providing water to 2 million people in the county. Treatment plant that we built, we already changed 2 of those to the highest level of the quality. We put ozonation, not chlorine anymore. So that's the huge step. We spend so much money to make sure that the people get in the safest water here. So we're changing the last one right now, as we know, as we're rebuilding the treatment plant. So in order to make sure that nothing happened, we do so much. We do research and we change the technology. We follow the technology, what is happening, what kind of quality of water we have. Specifically, I cannot talk about chlorine, chloramine, and all others, but I'm just giving you the overall view of what the district does. So I'm really proud of what the district do because we spend so much money on the research to make sure that things are not going to happen in the future.
And I see we have a question over here.
Yeah, Elizabeth Macon, Cowell College 71. I'm curious because on the one hand we have the big push for domestic water conservation, and not only inside the house but outside the house in terms of your landscaping and the swimming pools and putting the cover on the pool and so forth. And you also have the emphasis on groundwater recharging, but you're even importing water in order to put it back in the ground, and you're recycling water in order to put it back in the ground. And yet, in my neighborhood, I'm walking the dog, and I see that somebody has re-landscaped with a xeriscape, and yet their downspouts are coming in corrugated pipe out to the street. Why aren't we looking at residential groundwater recharging more? And I even have spent a little bit of time, not extensive, but saying, how can I map my neighborhood's groundwater? And if I were to put one of my downspouts into something like a bioswale, dig a ditch, fill it with sand, put a French pipe in there with the perforations, and have my downspout go under the redwood tree in my neighbor's backyard, is that going to be helpful, or is that just going to ruin the foundation of my house? The whole thing about groundwater recharging, to import water to recharge groundwater when we're not recharging groundwater with our own runoff, and the runoff that you can keep on your property instead of it going into the street, then it's not contaminated with all the stuff that's in the street, that drips off the cars. So I want to hear more about that.
So groundwater and recharge, anyone want to take that up? Groundwater mapping.
Again, that's not my area, but because I'm in water district, I know a little bit about it. Groundwater is very, very, very important to us. So I tell you, from the recycled water side, I have 2 hats. One from the district overview that it says you need to protect groundwater, aggressively protect groundwater, because as I said, this is the biggest reservoir we have. It's an excellent reservoir, and we need to protect it. Another one, recycled water expansion. Those purple pipe that go in everywhere. So we prevent some of those purple pipe going where that there is a groundwater, we call it sensitive groundwater, suddenly like a sponge going down to the ground. So we don't want the high salinity of recycled water to cause an impact on that. So in my view, one way we expanding recycled water, we should push for that, and another way protecting groundwater, so we're doing that. in your question, the same thing happened. We like to get every drop of water to the ground, but we want to make sure that drop of water is safe and good quality to go to the ground, so it's not going to impact our groundwater. We call our groundwater pristine, and we don't want to impact it, negatively impact it. So right now there's a lot of work. Peter, actually one of those people that are really pushing for stormwater, for using the water coming out from your roof, collect it somewhere to go and use it for your landscaping. But it's not that easy you think of, just get the downspout and put it in there, because you don't know what kind of roof do you have. All this oil from your roof, all those contaminants in there, you don't want to impact your groundwater, because you may do something good, you think that you're doing something good, but you're going to impact the huge reservoir that we have there. So we are right now into, I think, Peter, you know better than anybody else, because Palo Alto has been doing this, pushing for that, and Peter is the lead on that too, that we are looking in stormwater, how we can capture the stormwater in a safe manner and then put it into groundwater and recharging groundwater.
Can I add
Yes,
a
please.
little bit to that? So to strengthen your point, if we're talking about a coastal city like Santa Cruz, there's a good chance that the runoff, when it says runs to the bay, there it goes. And so that water was not beneficially used. However, if that water is being collected in a wastewater treatment plant, then you actually are concentrating the water in a way where it can be reused. So either way, you're avoiding, if that wastewater is being reused in some beneficial manner, you're avoiding that intervention upstream where you have to draw more water out of a river, like the Tuolumne, or draw water out of groundwater somewhere else, or otherwise import it. And so a way to think about that issue anywhere, well, I guess including the coast, is if you can trade it even without it going into the ground, treat it, reuse it, then you're avoiding pulling that much water into the city in the first place.
I'll just share a couple of things that are happening in Palo Alto. One is that there's been a big controversy over dewatering the shallow aquifer to build basements. So in some parts of the city, the water's pretty close to the surface, and people see these 4-inch pipes draining water right into the storm drain during the drought, and they're thinking, wait a minute, I'm taking my 5-minute shower, not watering the lawn, and I just see this water going out into the channelized creek. There was one house one basement that drained 30 million gallons. That's enough water to provide, serve Palo Alto for 3 days, or East Palo Alto, which has a supply shortage for 15 days. And so there's been a lot of talk about where to go there, and it's kind of neat. One of the leaders of Save Palo Alto's groundwater has been working with an architect who builds basements, and they came together with a proposal where you put these cutoff walls in that separate the construction from the groundwater basin, and it might cost an extra $50,000, but when you're building a mansion in Palo Alto with a basement, which is added square footage, it's really not that expensive. So I think the city is going to move in that direction. A second thing is we had a storm drain fee that the voters approved in 2005, and it's going to expire in June. So the city pulled together a task force to look at renewing it. And there's a lot of focus now on green stormwater infrastructure and trying to capture a lot of that runoff and percolate it down. So it takes a load off of the storm drains and the creeks, but it also filters that water and can recharge the groundwater, and perhaps maybe we can use more groundwater for irrigation and parks and other places. And so we changed the name from a storm drain fee to a stormwater management fee. And one of the benefits is that cities are now required to come up with green stormwater infrastructure plans, and it's a water quality issue. So we're moving forward, and it was a vote by mail for property owners, and they counted the votes yesterday, and we got 64% approval. So There was a project that they did in one neighborhood that didn't have storm drains, where instead of putting in that hard infrastructure, they created these bulb outs on the corners and bioswales, and it's nicely, has beautiful plants in it, native plants, and the water fills in those areas and percolates down, and it's recharging the groundwater, and it saved money on the infrastructure. So there are some neat things happening, and the thing about groundwater is we don't see it, and we don't think about it enough. And my understanding is that the 10 reservoirs in Santa Clara County that are operated by the water district, we see them and we think, oh, that's our water supply. But my understanding is that the main purpose of them when they were created was to create infiltration basins and recharging the groundwater. So again, that's our biggest reservoir. It's very well managed by the water district. And I actually use it as an example when I talk to agricultural districts in the Central Valley, and I say, now, look, you might not think Silicon Valley is an appropriate comparison, but this used to be the Valley of Heart's Delight. Yeah. And it was agriculture and pumping for the orchards that led to about 13 feet of subsidence in San Jose that triggered the changes.
Could I just add one more thing? On a bigger scale, Annie Fisher from UCSC is doing an amazing groundwater recharge exchange with some ag land down in Watsonville, and I just heard a talk about a study, and what he's doing is just what you're talking about, but in ag. He's talking to neighbors who have perfect groundwater opportunity and partnering them with the farmers and working on exchanges so they can use the water from their recharge in the fields, and it is fantastic. If anyone in this group gets a chance to look at his research and what he's doing down there, it really is incentivizing on both sides how to take that, exactly what you're looking at, all this water going somewhere, and here are all these fields and berries and lettuce that need so much water, and how can we make that happen?
Great. Are there another question over here?
Yeah, thank you. David Hansen, slug from 76. In fact, I was a slug before slugs were official.
You were a sea otter.
I was a soccer player, and we informally adopted slughood way back when. I want to direct some questions toward our entrepreneurs on the panel, and maybe others if they've heard of technologies. What other inspiring technologies have you come across in the water realm, and perhaps especially directed towards India or other less wealthy countries? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I guess I can take a quick stab at that. Two interesting technologies that I've actually come across in the last probably 2 weeks, both in the actual leak detection space. One is a company from Israel called Utilis, which was actually one of our portfolio mates out of Imagine H2O. What they do is they'll actually take aerial footage of just land, obviously, and they use I think they use radar, if I'm not mistaken, and apparently the way that's treated water reflects differently than, I guess, non-treated water or whatever they're looking for is different, and you can actually analyze via color on this spectral map of where there's actually a leak. And so what they'll do is they'll figure out via color if there's an actual leak in a particular area. I probably misstated that a little bit, but that's the general idea. There's another cool technology out of actually San Francisco. It's an ex-GE Ventures guy that used to work on GE Ventures for water, and he has a company called Industrial Optic. They're out of actually another one of our competitive accelerators called Lemnos Labs, which primarily invests in hardware companies in the Bay and abroad, actually. But what they're doing is they're developing a kind of little underwater drone that can travel within the pipes, and what it has is a hydrometer, and the hydrometer is able to actually listen to if there is a leak, and you can measure these frequencies, and so they kind of travel through these pipelines, and if somebody has requested that there's a potential leak in this area, they'll send this down. The coolest thing outside of them actually being able to hear if there's a leak or not is they can actually patch the leak via this drone. So in that actual location, they'll go and they'll fix the leak, and they'll that was absolutely really interesting.
Could I just say, when you turn 50, you'll know what inspired that.
Can you educate me?
It's from the local to the macro.
No?
Never mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Any other technologies anyone would like to share?
Thanks, Brent.
Sorry about that.
That was good. Well, you know, it's so funny because Ravi and I met at Berkeley. We were doing a thing at Berkeley. There's Davis and Berkeley. All these UCs are doing very cool things. And when I met him, he inspired me because we've been talking about in terms of road mapping and how to talk about water quality, because that is definitely something that more and more conversations are being had in a variety of ways. There was also an interesting article, Sue, who's here, she's my UX UI amazing talent at our office, and she just sent an article. There's some really cool stuff coming out in desalination and filtration there. There's a lot of things happening. It's interesting for me from the entrepreneurial perspective, because I never think of myself as an entrepreneur. I think of myself as an old politician. But what is amazing to me is how hard it is in water and technology, and how tough that conversation is, how hard it is to fundraise, how people really don't think about it, care about it. And it's really, for those of us that are excited about it and in the space are working very hard to draw attention to it and to get the funding for these projects. Yes, it is difficult to work with government, but at the end of the day, it's tough to get private investment to get excited about water, and that's been an interesting learning experience for me, because I was like, gosh, you know, this is such a big issue in so many fronts. Of course you're going to be excited about this, and it's sort of like, let's talk about the next app for my social media and how I'm going to make a friend, and and connect with people that way. And they don't want to talk about water. So what I think is interesting is to see the people that are still sort of pushing and trying to get their technology out there and to get it funded and are committed to it, whether or not they're getting funding from private investment.
I think kind of just adding to that from the venture space, I was actually, how many of you watched Silicon Valley on HBO? Yeah, that's good. The people under 50, it seems like. Nothing against being over 50. Go there. I digress. Anyways, I was on Sand Hill Road. We were pitching to a VC, and you know, this lady actually said a very interesting thing to me of, look, for every dollar that we spend, since we're building hardware, it's going to take $1 to invest just in your company, right? And the way that a VC model works, in just generally speaking, is they'll have $10, right, and on average, and 70% of these, $7 out of these 10 will end up in startups that actually just don't survive, and they end up, failing after probably about a year or 2 years. They'll kind of chug along. Maybe about 20 to 30% of them will end up managing at some certain extent, and they'll end up selling to some larger company that buys them out at a loss. Around $2 of those 10 end up actually making somewhat of a big hit, but not your Uber, not your Facebook, not your Google, and the 10% or the actual $1 ends up being the big hit. And that's how these VCs apparently build their models around making money. And we built a model very similar to this in India. It's sad, however, you don't ever want to invest in a losing team. And so when you have a certain amount of dollars allotted in your fund, why would you invest in hardware when you can invest 10 cents for every dollar that you have in software? Right? I can invest in 10 Match.coms, nothing against Gary. I think he has an amazing product. And Match also founded Tinder, which I actually found my girlfriend on right now. So I have immense respect for Gary. Yeah. But why would you do that? And on top of that, if you're building hardware for water, if you don't have a Nest, if you don't have an August smart lock, if you don't have a drop cam that's looking at the safety for your baby, what am I going to do managing water? Why do I really care about that? Because that's what the utilities handle. That's what they do, and you pay your water bill. And so I think there's this disconnect from venture and understanding, well, how do I actually give money to a startup for them to actually incentivize the end user, whether it be the homeowner or the business or whoever your customer is that you're selling to actually derive value and make the next Facebook for water, right? How do we, I say Facebook in terms of a big hit, how do we have the next big hit for water, and what does that business model look like? I think it's going to come out there with kind of what everybody's been saying today of water is our most precious resource, and it is a depleting resource. And to get people to understand that this is not going to look the way that it does today, and times are changing. And so how do you actually explain that and convey that message to capital is the biggest thing. And maybe it's something that we just need to tell ourselves as entrepreneurs of Sand Hill Road's just not the place to go look for money. Maybe it is California. Maybe it is the government that needs to fund startups in terms of innovation for water and for environment that gets us out there. But back to my kind of first point that I make is, how do startups talk to government? We work at such a fast pace, and Hilary mentioned this earlier, is our plan is different on Friday than it is on Monday. And it's completely flip-flopped, and we just don't know where we're going, what we're doing, and how we're iterating. But really figuring that out, I think, is going to be the key in understanding how we bridge the gap between innovation and actual policy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add something? I think that really that's a good question that you asked. If you talk to anybody 20 years ago in California, they never talk about water. It's going to be one of the important things here for the life. So as we go and do the survey, we find out that the water becomes like #1, economy is 2. So, and then another thing is really sometimes the bad things happen to us. It is causing some good things coming out from it, like a drought and climate change. I believe this is a bad things, but who doesn't believe the climate change anymore? But the thing is those things are causing some of the states that they have rain all the time, like Seattle. They have shortage of water last year and previous years. So California now is really getting more and more drought coming out. And those developed countries and those rich states, they are the ones that are building the technology for underdeveloped countries. Those things that we are doing right now, it's going to be useful for any countries. It's going to be good for underdeveloped countries. And that's a good thing is coming out, because otherwise they cannot do it. So I think that in the future, as we can see now, the water is getting so important, and it's going to get more important that the people are going to invest more money on the invention and more money on technology. And also you can see right now like Microsoft, I saw it, I think you saw the video too. So one of the things is they're using the wastewater, some sort of ad house that they're using. Some places they don't have the sewage treatment plant, they don't have the pipeline. They're just doing, the on-site. Their waste is going to be on site. So by building those kind of technology that everyone can use it, and not only is going to prevent from impacting the water, rivers, groundwater, waterway, and also they can use that water, and they can use the methane coming from that biological activity. So that's an invention. I think that would be really good, useful for India, for other countries that they have issue with water, and also with wastewater that they have. So it's wastewater causing a lot of issue, not only there, here too. So if we know how to use the wastewater, how to clean it, then we're going to prevent also to impact our groundwater too.
Following up on your point about decentralization, a few weeks ago, we celebrated the 9th annual Silicon Valley Water Conservation Awards. One of our winners, Susan Wright from Ecology Action, is here. And we have an innovation category. And last year, the winner was a company called Z Nano, which is in San Jose. And they do on-site recycled water for laundromats, but it could be for hotels or breweries or any places that use a lot of water. And so instead of the wastewater flowing downhill to a wastewater treatment plant and then getting pumped back up, they do that on site, and it saves energy. And they're essentially creating distilled water, which only needs about 10% as much of the detergent to clean, so they're saving on detergent. And the water that comes in is warm, and they're capturing that heat and cleaning it and reusing again, so that saves energy as well. And I thought that was, the multiple benefits of that were very impressive. So I think we have, Toby, did you have a question?
I do have a question. Thank you. I'm curious, the theme tonight is scale. I'm curious about, for the entrepreneurs, how time scale affects what you do. We have fluctuations on a daily basis. we have annual fluctuations in the way our weather, we're wet and then we're dry, and we have these long-term fluctuations that drive innovation and drought and budget cycles for academia. So how do timescales affect the work you do? And are you afraid that, like now that we're sort of out of the drought, we might be in another timescale that's so long that we might lose some of that excitement about what you do? And I think time is really important as it cuts across water issues. Thank you.
You want to take that one first?
So time moves so much faster in my life now than it did when I was in government. Especially sitting in council meetings, those went on forever and ever. But you know what's interesting is when we started this project, I was critically concerned about the drought, and there wasn't a anticipation that we thought we'd get some rain, but we didn't think that it was going to rain like it's been raining. But yet I look and think, okay, well, we're getting rain, but then San Antonio, Texas is having problems, and Florida is having problems, and we may have an immediate relief to the pressure that we had in the state of California, but we are going to cycle back certainly at some point, and we haven't solved our groundwater problem, and this is going to be something that for us it's a project for the long term. We have a roadmap that we're following, we're iterating on, we add as problems change, and we are so agile and able to shift so quickly that we have the ability to do that. But I don't think in terms of water, the problem is it exists, and it'll continue in some form to be a challenge for this country. And I think part of that is what I spoke to earlier, is I think that regardless of what's happening with our climate, which I think is on an unfortunately bad trajectory, we have infrastructure problems that we haven't even touched the surface on across the nation in every municipality, and it's not small numbers. It's not little repairs, it's big repairs. And so that's really going to change, I think, in this country and other countries, the conversation about water. I went to a small water district off of Laurel Curve. They had about 30 homes, and they had a multitude of challenges they were facing there between, you know, the recent problems and roads and slides into their wells. And then if you looked at what their infrastructure was, it was basically PVC pipes running up a mountainside. And you thought, oh my gosh, you know, this is, you know, smart people living in nice homes, and their water infrastructure and their system is a combination of surface and groundwater, and these people are doing the best they can. But this is just one tiny pocket off of Highway 17. There's multiple pockets all over our Santa Cruz Mountain, San Mateo. They are just there. And we have, as a country, to sort of think about, it's not just the systems that we're running in Santa Clara. It's a lot of these little tiny, we're just figuring it out, and we've had water this way since 1946, and that's just the way we've done it. So the time is, it moves very quickly in terms of what we do, but I think it's a long-term play, and there's a lot of levels to be dealt with, not just here, but across our country and the world, for that matter.
Yeah, I'd kind of add, I think there's two general answers to that. Time, from our point of view, if we're wearing our kind of nearsighted glasses, right, is time is basically money for us, right? If we don't hit our launch, if we don't get product, the company doesn't exist anymore, right? So time from that perspective is obviously very critical to a startup. If you look at time in the kind of respect that you asked it in terms of the fluctuations with environment, the fluctuations with water, we're in a drought, we're not in a drought, I think is actually proportional to the word application, right? And so about a year ago, we used to go out and pitch to venture, pitch to customers, saying, hey, look, we're in a drought. If you have the Sutro in your swimming pool, we'll help you save water. And that seemed to be the biggest selling point on our little Facebook ad that we used to have. As of this summer, it's save less money, you know, save more money on chemicals. Make sure that your kids are safe swimming in safer water. Those are the two biggest kind of messages that we have in actually selling to these end users. And so, you know, has the product changed? Has the value proposition changed? Not really. We're still making the same sensor, the same chemicals, the same app. Nothing's really changed. All that's really changed is that we're in a drought, we're not in a drought. And the messaging that really hits those particular people has changed. Or you look at farmers, right? They were, like I'd mentioned earlier, they were interested in the groundwater versus the surface water. They're not really interested in that now. I mean, they they actually are given sigma, but they're more interested actually in precision agriculture. And so understanding how do I measure the water chemistry, pair it with my soil chemistry to get my plants to grow better, because that's going to give me more revenues. And so I say, time is actually proportional to application and how you message that for your actual end customer given its market.
We have another question over here.
Mike Reapy, I'm Oaks 91. Several people have mentioned that crisis breeds innovation, right? And we've been talking about mostly the residential market. I'm wondering that the Central Valley farmers were certainly in crisis for the last few years as well. And I'm wondering, they've done some things. They've changed crops. They've gone to drip irrigation instead of flood irrigation. I'm wondering, maybe this is a good question for Dr. Haddad, but what have farmers been doing for the last few years in the drought, and that's going to carry forward?
So the farmers are always looking for innovation. And in terms of what will carry forward, if they are relying on rain irrigation, it's not necessarily true that they'll be carrying anything forward, because they'll just still rely on rain. If they're relying on groundwater, well, there's, in addition to the drought, there's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that is going to slowly, but probably in the next 15 years or so, just really change how they irrigate. This issue, and now talking about our region, especially the Central Coast, there are really high valued crops in that area, like the strawberries and the other berries. And those farmers have a huge stake in everything that you were talking about, in soil chemistry and groundwater chemistry. And so they have been very interested in these issues of smart systems and huge amounts of sensors throughout the fields and where water is coming in. And in some cases, it's different kinds of water, reclaimed water, groundwater with different levels of salinity. And this is something where the mixing issues, and this even gets back to the chloramine question, because chloramines have a mixing, the importance of chloramines is in what they're interacting with. And so these kinds of issues now are moving forward with farmers. The other thing that I think is I guess continuing to be important is the management of nitrates. Because farmers here in California and elsewhere, the importance of keeping nitrates out of our surface waters, like our rivers from runoff, just keeps growing. And especially in the regulatory ability to move farmers to action is also growing. And so that's another innovation area, is how to remove nitrates from water. And that'll be really good for the environment if we can solve that problem.
I'll just point out that in Stanislaus County, which gets most of its irrigation water from the Tuolumne, they had record sales, agricultural sales, during the drought, and it probably came from overpumping the groundwater basin.
Statewide, the most money we've ever made in agriculture was at the height of the drought. Wow. Part of that was, it wasn't just because ag was using so much water, but they were. Part of it was that almond demand skyrocketed worldwide, and that raised our revenues statewide more than ever. But still, it is connected to water and how much.
That was price increases for food, though.
It was.
At the grocery store, prices are up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the question is that groundwater basin going to be recharged in time for the next drought? Because it really helped out a lot, this drought.
Yep.
And right now on the Tuolumne, they're releasing the maximum amount of water they can without flooding Modesto. in order to create capacity for the snow melt. And it's about 10,000 cubic feet per second. That's started in early January, and it's going to go through May. And I love to see a lot of water in the river, but there's kind of a sweet spot where once you go above that, you're not really getting a lot of environmental benefit. And this would be an ideal year to try to capture some of that water and recharge the groundwater basin. And they're doing it on a small scale. There's a group called Sustainable Conservation that's working with farmers to flood irrigate, and that's called the poor man's recharge. But there are injection wells that can inject water down into the groundwater basin, and it takes some investment, and the irrigation districts don't have a whole lot of money. Here in the Bay Area, we pay maybe $1,500 an acre foot. In the Modesto area, they pay $15 an acre foot. So there's not a lot of revenue coming in for these projects, but there was a very interesting relationship when Don Pedro Dam, which is the big reservoir on the Tuolumne that you cross over on your way to Yosemite, when that was constructed, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission paid for about half of it. And they can't access the water, but they established a water bank that at times when, because of their junior water rights, they would be required to let water pass through the Hetch Hetchy system. If they have water in their water bank, they can capture water and subtract an equal amount. And perhaps they could help fund a groundwater recharge program, and then they could have a groundwater bank there that would work similarly, and it would get them through what they planned for, which is an 8.5-year drought, looking at climate change. So interesting things that could happen. And I think, and there's actually in the water bond that was approved a couple of years ago, there's $2.7 billion for storage. And most of the water agencies think dams, and most of the environmentalists think groundwater. And I think groundwater probably has a much higher return. It's not as glamorous. It's not, can't put a name on the dam, but you can capture a lot of water in the space that's been created. So I saw, yes, we have a question over here.
So my name is Kim Wiseman-Sleater, Stevenson, 81. I'm not really sure what my question is, so hopefully it will emerge as I'm talking. But some of what I'm hearing is, or what I've heard elsewhere, is any water that runs to the bay is wasted water. And we want to reclaim it and get it back into the ground and blah, blah, blah. And I'm wondering about the unintended consequences of that, since the bay needs a certain amount of fresh water recharge to itself. The bay ecology requires a certain amount of fresh water. So if we're capturing as much as we can and the bay is not getting the water it needs, how do we balance those needs?
Well, I bet our moderator could answer that well, but could I just take a small stab at it? The crucial bay water is what's coming down the Carquinez Strait from the delta, and to the extent that we can maintain those flows, it's maintaining massive ecological benefits throughout the middle of California and our water system. And so there could be a connection between the kind of water recycling and reuse we're doing around the bay and leaving more water in our natural systems, in the San Joaquin River and the Sacramento River and its tributaries, and essentially helping the entire Bay Delta ecosystem by having greater outflows. And so the connection there is, let's recycle as much as we can here and become as water independent as possible, which is one of the goals of Santa Clara Valley Water Agency, and therefore keep more water in the natural systems. And so there is a little bit of a loss in terms of freshwater inflow and the possible impacts on those ecosystems, but even that is really not part of the historic natural flow regime, because an outflow from a wastewater treatment plant isn't what the system is used to for the last 1,000 years. It's something very new and unusual. And so I would say that the more we can recycle, the better when we're thinking about the environmental impacts.
One interesting thing, I believe that what really drove the Santa Clara Valley Recycled Water Project was that there was too much fresh water from the wastewater treatment plants entering the South Bay, and it was changing, it was reducing the amount of salt. And Environmental Protection Agency said, here's a cap on how much fresh water you can release into the South Bay, and that really, they had to figure out some way to use that water, so it drove the recycling. In the north part of the bay, it's the exact opposite. And about half of the precipitation that falls in California flows out through the delta naturally into the bay. And nowadays, it's only about 50% of what normally would have flowed through. Unimpaired flow makes it to the bay. And some years it's 35%. So it's changing the salinity mixing zone, and that affects plankton and thus everything up to marine mammals. And there were toxic algae blooms you might have heard about during the drought. So the water's warm and stagnant, and you have this cyanobacteria that produces neurotoxins. And so those issues are the State Water Board is working on updating the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which was last significantly updated over 20 years ago. And they're looking at requiring a certain percentage of unimpaired flow coming from the Sacramento and its tributaries and the San Joaquin and its tributaries into the bay. And it's controversial because it would mean water agencies, as they would see it, wasting some of that water, letting it flow to the bay and the ocean. But it's really critical if we want to revive the salmon population and all the ecosystem and the salmon-based ecosystem. So the comment deadline was just a few weeks ago, and there's maybe going to be a decision at the end of the summer. But that's a big issue right now in the water world. People are really paying attention. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kristen Lee, and I work in the Sustainability Office at UC Santa Cruz and focus on water and waste. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much for all of the panelists and your thoughts and the thoughtful questions. My question is regarding the intersections of political stability and drought. So I read a study the other day about the fact that when there is a drought, the people mostly look to oust the people who are in power, regardless of whether they rationally understand that, Hilary caused
I didn't
the
get
drought
ousted.
personally.
I chose not to run, but I might have gotten ousted if I had.
So my question is, given that drought and climate change is informing more drought coming, can any of the panelists kind of speak to how political stability and drought intersect with, with state funding and the institutions of academia and other public institutions, and how that could flow or bleed into entrepreneurial, exercises?
Good question. Drought and conflict. Who wants to take that? It's probably not on the small side.
Well, no. So first of all, that is such a great UC Santa Cruz question. It is so interdisciplinary. And there have been some theories, and some of them are being proved wrong, that you need a temperate climate to have a democracy. Because otherwise people are too grumpy and can't get along. But in fact, India has been a pretty darn successful democracy, and even our wonderful democracy is having its issues at the moment. So maybe it's not the temperate climate that determines if democracy will thrive. However, getting to this issue of climate change and the stability of governance, if systems of government cannot solve common problems that are existing, then people are going to look for ways to get those problems solved. And let's hope, and I think we can expect that through voting and through elections, we can put people in control who are going to make the kinds of changes we need. And so it's hard for me to imagine that climate change would lead to major political upheaval in our country. I think that our systems are flexible enough to respond to it. However, if there are lots of other reasons already in a country for political discontent, when you start throwing in massive floods and these catastrophes, that could certainly contribute to the destabilization and turnover of the existing regime. So a lot of it, I think, has to do with how much flexibility is built into the existing regime, and can it respond, even if it's slow? Can it actually respond and solve the problems that arise?
I actually have a point to that too. My story actually starts at a bar in Tel Aviv. I was there about a week ago, or a week and a half ago, and as we all know, Israel is in a very politicized zone. I was actually speaking with a politician there who was working on water and water rights in the Middle Eastern area, and kind of two words that he said that really hit me is basically resource resiliency, right? If kind of to your point of, if you can make sure that people are just generally covered in terms of water and food and shelter and XYZ, whatever these needs are, politically you can kind of you have a little bit more leeway to do a little bit more stuff. However, if people are actually being strangled by that they can't get access to water or access to food, then you're going to want to oust the person that's above you to get some other person in to actually solve that issue. But it was really interesting for me, to come from California, being in a drought, speaking to an Israeli who's working on desal, who's working on all this water technology. And it's funny that I'm traveling over there from a drought-ridden state to go and get investment for water technology, right? Like, why am I there figuring this out? And I think it was on this basis of them being in such a politicized environment, of actually focusing on resource resiliency, of the very fact that I'm actually flying on a plane over there to go look for capital. I think it's a point to be made.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've already heard a couple of conversations too about the challenges on the political side is when you're making those decisions, people will come to you and say, "What? We're in a budget crisis. It's raining. We're fine." You're having to plan so far in advance for things that when you're in that crisis moment, if somebody who you probably weren't even in office at the time, I often think many of the decisions that I made in 2010 are now taking effect. I was making decisions in 2010, and in 2017, I go, "Oh, I did that. Wow, that's cool. That was a while, but we did it. All right." Nothing happens quickly, and so oftentimes from the position of the person who's making that vote and taking that vote, it's because of years of people either not doing something or years of people having planned something. In our case, on the desalination plan, it was 10 years more of planning, and here we were taking a vote, and people said, "Wait a minute, what desal? We haven't had this conversation yet." And you realize that often government, you live in the vacuum of, we're having the conversation all the time, the community isn't having the conversation, and it's really tough to plan. Then people will say, "Well, why didn't you build the dam 10 years ago? Why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that?" And the person in that seat has to make the decision. And sometimes it takes, being thoughtful and saying, well, we're going to go forward with this recycling plant because even though money's tight, we will need this. And sometimes that works out, and sometimes you're in Santa Barbara and you build a desal plant, and then the second you got it up and running, you shut it down. It's hard to tell when you're making those decisions if they're the right ones, but we're all human, you're making those votes. And it takes people who are really committed to saying, this is, I think, the best decision I can make for my community, given all the information I have at that time. And that may lead to you being ousted. That's just the way politics works.
I think we have time for one more very quick question, and it looks like there's still food and drinks out, so if we're not chased out of the room, people can stick around and ask some questions one-on-one. Is there a, yes, over here.
Hello, I'm a graduating senior at UC Santa Cruz, John Windsor. My question's mainly for Ravi. I'm curious, what's the chemistry that goes on in the Sutro box that makes it such a good, cheap way to test water for quality?
I'll take that one.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead. The chemistry in the Sutro box that makes it, sorry, repeat your question again?
So, like, what type of chemistry goes on in the box? Like, what test does that run to determine the quality of the water, and what type of concentrations of chemicals are in there?
Yeah, what's your background? What are you majoring in?
Chemistry major.
Awesome. This is going to be, man, I'm going to shut off the rest of this room right now.
You can give the quick answer now and then give him the long answer.
Quick answer. Let me tell you a quick story. We had a pool in Boston that we had tested with an old sensor that we put out there. And as many of you are familiar, when you deal with the swimming pool, you want the pH to be between 7.2 and 7.4. The software was reading that the pH was an 8.2, and so we prescribed that the lady put in some acid. It turns out that the actual pool's chemistry was a 6.8, which means that we had put acid in an already acidic pool. Not only will that screw up her equipment, it might ruin her pump, might ruin her piping, but that's actually detrimental to your skin at some point in time. I don't know when, but it probably hurts you at some point in time. We went and tested the sensor. What ended up happening was that the sensor ends up drifting. And so we never know when the sensor actually does drift, and so what we asked people to do is to have to calibrate these sensors. At that point in time, we pulled 300 sensors off the market. We had about $250,000 left in the bank, which is about 5 months of time in our life. And so we had to develop an entirely new sensor that's calibrationless. So to answer your question, the story actually explains 2 main points. One is that calibration is a really, really, really big issue in water management because you don't know when the sensor actually begins to drift. And secondly is how do you actually do tests that are titration based, right? Like an alkalinity test where you're dripping liquids and you're looking for an inflection point. So what this box does currently today is it does pH, free chlorine, and alkalinity. What we're able to do also is cyanuric acid, total dissolved solids, lead, arsenic, phosphates, nitrates, as well as salt content.
Is that through like the Tableau method analyzing it through the concentrations, like hydrogen and certain other things in the water?
We actually use computer vision and color.
Okay, I'm going to make an exception. We're going to hear one more question.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Actually, it's not a question. I think you have an offer.
I was asked to give a public service announcement about our jobs. So just everyone, I work for Ecology Action in Santa Cruz, and we have this WaterLink program that we do door-to-door installation of water conservation equipment, shower heads and faucet aerators. And we have about 30 jobs open right now. So if you can spread the word, especially to bilingual people, Spanish and Vietnamese, we're serving in Santa Clara County, in the Bosque area, Hayward, and San Mateo County, and in Monterey Bay area.
And again, it's an award-winning program.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you all. Let's hear it for our panel. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you all for your good work. Kyle and Sarah and the rest of the team, thank you. And thank you all for coming out and being engaged. We've got challenges ahead. Working together, we will make things happen. And go Slugs.